Hi everyone, we are live. This is Candice Malcolm with the True North Initiative, coming to you live this Tuesday afternoon. Lots going on in the news in the world. There's sort of two main stories that are kind of exploding simultaneously in the news right now. There are huge rallies and protests and just sort of ongoing public displays of dissatisfaction in Alberta. Folks are pretty fed up with the situation there. There's a little bit of panic about the price of crude oil. And there's a leaked story in the CBC about the Trudeau government investing in the problem. Basically, what their programs are designed to do is continue. It's like phase two, continuing their phase out of the oil industry in Canada. So that's pretty distressing stuff. The main story that I want to talk about is these ridiculous year-end interviews that Trudeau's doing right now, how he just totally gets a pass from the mainstream media. And particularly we'll talk about some of the comments that he made about immigration, supposedly fear-mongering that's going on, and how he just sort of passes the buck on to Conservatives and blames it all on them. And then in the midst of all that, the mainstream media don't bat an eye, they don't challenge him, they don't combat any of the things that he's saying that are completely fabricated and untrue. They just sort of nod along and then dutifully write up their news stories that echo exactly what Trudeau says and spread this ridiculous lie of a narrative that somehow the Conservatives are to blame for backlash against immigration. So lots to get through. Let me know where you guys are watching from. I'm going to wait a few more minutes here while people jump on Facebook. And yeah, let me know where you're watching from. There is sort of the last week before Christmas, I guess. Next week will be pretty quiet. We, the True North Initiative, won't be in the office, so probably won't be doing lives. These will be the last ones this week. Today and Friday, I've been going live regularly on Tuesdays and Fridays. I heard back from lots of people saying that they wanted to see more regular live videos, so we've implemented that. All right, let's get going here. Let's get going. So yes, I know there's lots going on in Alberta. I think I'll probably cover that in a later live video. What I want to talk about today is these ridiculous round of year-end interviews that the Prime Minister does. You know, they're kind of a mix between the sort of fluff, like puff piece kind of fawning media. He goes on the morning shows and talks about his favorite topics, including, you know, the color of his socks and the type of shampoo that he uses. We've seen this sort of charade over and over again. Of course, it didn't happen when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. You don't see someone like Doug Ford or Jason Kenney get to do these kind of chummy, idiotic interviews. But with Justin Trudeau, he's like one half celebrity, one half political leader. The political leader part's not that important because he's hired other people to do that job for him. So he's sort of just this like personality that some Canadians adore, although I'd argue that he's probably more hated and despised than he is adored. But here he is saying...
Ryan Reynolds or Ryan Gosling?
I just saw Ryan Reynolds' gym ad. His sense of humor is just awesome. And I bet both of them. Ryan Gosling is lovely and calm, but Ryan Reynolds just makes me proud to be a Canadian.
Yeah, you have a career as a diplomat. Yeah. You walk the line beautifully.
I should be a diplomat. Well, that's kind of his job already. He's a lead representative of our country, Canada, and he gets asked a stupid, idiotic question like that. And he doesn't just kind of like laugh it off. He actually gives a thoughtful answer, except for he can't get through a sentence without just stumbling on his words and, you know, saying every second word. It's just so embarrassing. You know, he gets asked a stupid question like that and he can barely get through an answer. I mean, who cares what the Prime Minister thinks about celebrities? I don't care. I can't fathom anyone sitting at home thinking like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to ask my Prime Minister in the midst of all this turmoil. You know, Albertans are suffering. The country is divided. There's just huge divides between, you know, feuds between Quebec and Alberta. We have these massive out of control deficits. We have a crisis of illegal immigration. There's starting to be a huge backlash in this country. I'm going to get to that later in this talk. But, of all the things that are happening in Canada, I'm sure missing other things, that continue with this Trudeau government. And yet you get him on your show, and the thing you choose to ask him about is talk about some celebrities, and then Trudeau just, happily jumps in and talks about that. It's pretty pathetic. So that's the range, that's sort of like the fluff, sort of, I don't know, designed for appealing to like teenage girls or stay-at-home moms or something like that. Although, again, I think stay-at-home moms and teenage girls have more intelligence than that in Canada. And then, there is the other end where you have someone like Evan Solomon over at CTV who actually does, press the prime minister a little bit. He's a tough interviewer. He was tough against conservatives and he's tough against liberals. And so this is what happens when Trudeau does get pushed a little bit, and you can just sort of see where he goes with this one.
If you're running $19 billion deficits now, your fiscal capacity to deal with a rainy day is got to be worse.
Actually, that's not true, and for two reasons. First of all, the ratings agencies have given us that AAA because they are confident in our ability to withstand shocks in the future if they come. Secondly, when Canadians have better jobs, when they have more education, when we have solid infrastructure, either climate change, resilient economy, that's the choice we made to invest in our communities, to invest in our future, and that's what's giving Canadians confidence.
Okay, so the question was, what do you do? How do you have a fiscal capacity in case there's some kind of crisis down the road to borrow more when you're already racking up $20 billion deficits when we have a fairly strong economy across the country? That was the question. And then Trudeau rambles off some nonsense about how he's investing in climate change, and that's why Canadians have confidence in him. But the question wasn't about whether or not Canadians have confidence in him. The question was whether we have the fiscal capacity to withstand a recession. So again, that's the kind of stuff you have to push back the Prime Minister against. His answer is just sort of like, actually, no, Evan, you're wrong, which is not really a good answer and is kind of condescending. I think it's a lot of the reason why Canadians don't like the Prime Minister. They think he's arrogant and smug, and those kind of answers don't help. Not only do they think he's arrogant and smug, they think he's sort of intellectually a lightweight and doesn't really comprehend what he's doing in the role of Prime Minister. And again, that echoes it when he's literally asked a question about deficits and the fiscal capacity of the government to borrow more. Keep in mind that paying interest on the debt in Canada is the third largest expense in the entire government. And yet he, to the question of how you would potentially handle that, his response is that Canadians have confidence in him. Okay, so that's pretty bad. This is the worst one though. I'm gonna show this one. He is giving kind of a year-end talk to a bunch of journalists who are sitting, and this is where he gets into the discussion that I was talking about with immigration. I'll pause a few times. It's fairly long. It's 2 minutes, but I want to get through the whole thing because it's really telling, not only what he says, but the fact that the media give him a pass on this is really outrageous. So I'll play it in bursts and I'll stop in between just to break it up a little bit.
The decision that the Conservatives have taken recently to, for example, go after the Global Compact on migration in a way that is deliberately and knowingly spreading falsehoods to Canadians.
Okay, let's stop it right there. So he says that the way that the Conservatives, this whole thing is about how he thinks that the Conservatives are spreading falsehoods on immigration. He said that the way that they're deliberately picking on the UN Compact on migration. I saw everything that the Conservatives put out, and I think it was all fair comment and pretty accurate. I know that the media jumped all over Conservative claims that the UN Compact undermined Canadian sovereignty. I think that that's a factual statement, and it's totally fair to say. Keep in mind that when the Conservatives were in office and the Liberals were in opposition, they would constantly make these kind of accusations. Anytime that Canada was signing a bilateral agreement with the United States, anytime that there was anything about increased national security, increased cooperation, increased intel, like sharing of information between Canadian and American officials, the Liberals were constantly crying foul, and they would make accusations like the fact that these agreements undermine Canadian sovereignty. and Canada's ability to make its own decisions. And so, you know, when the shoe's on the other foot and it's the Liberals that are in office and they're signing all these multilateral agreements with the United Nations, and, you know, included among them these drastic new calls that aren't included in Canadian law. The fact that now that Canada is a signatory to the UN Compact, that compact can be used in Canadian courts and immigration judges can cite it as part of their ruling, say, to overturn a decision made by the Canadian government. I mean, it's a pretty clear pathway. I've explained this in depth in previous videos. You can check those out. But it's pretty clear how the UN Compact could potentially undermine Canadian sovereignty, and I predict it will. I will write reports and I'll put out a video the moment it happens. I'm going to keep an eye on the court cases and how you know, judges may use this UN Compact, because I guarantee that this migrant compact will be cited by a judge in Canada in a decision to overturn a government decision, say that we would have deported someone. The judge is saying they can stay based on this UN Compact migration. That's an example of our sovereignty being undermined, because instead of the Canadian government getting to decide who comes to the country, it would be an unelected judge using the precedent of this UN Compact. So that's all just to say that what Trudeau is saying here is not true, and the media should pounce on it. When he's saying that the Conservatives are being dishonest, they should say, can you give an example? What specifically have the Conservatives said that is dishonest? And then if he cites this UN Compact and sovereignty argument, which a lot of his government officials have cited that as example. Gerald Butts tweeted about it, and I believe Trudeau himself said it in the House of Commons, then you could push back, well, you know, some experts do believe that the compact could undermine sovereignty. Like, that's not a blatant falsehood. That's a point of contention in your analysis of international law. So anyway, Trudeau's just going on this spouting, this nonsense. And just as a side note, notice the way that he's speaking. He's kind of putting on his best, like, drama teacher performance here. And you can tell that he's kind of memorized his lines. This is what he talks like when he's not, when he's kind of scripted. When he's asked a question, he doesn't know the answer. You see how he bumbles and he fumbles with his words and he rambles, he's incoherent. This is a Trudeau that is like the polished, drama teacher Trudeau. So let's keep playing.
Political gain and to drum up anxiety around immigration is irresponsible. It's not the way we should be moving forward in a thoughtful way on one of the big issues that is facing our country. Should we have conversations about what the right level of immigration is? Sure, absolutely, and that's healthy and important. Are we doing the best possible job we can of ensuring that our immigration system is being applied fairly and evenly and rigorously? Sure, let's have those debates. But the fear-mongering...
It's funny that he says, like, sure, let's have those debates, because when we try to have those debates, when we bring up those issues, Trudeau has the same line. He still calls it fear-mongering. He still calls it, despicable and all this stuff. I know, because I wrote a book on this topic in 2016, and the liberal hate machine jumped on all over me and smeared me and said that my analysis was whatever, xenophobic or whatever they called me. But it's like, when you try to have a reasonable, logical, fact-based conversation on this stuff, they call you a bigot. And when you make a big deal about something and you cause a scene or cause, when you get excited about something and you point to something and say, no, that's wrong, we need to take a stand against it, they do the exact same reaction. So it doesn't matter on the scale of whether you're trying to come at them as a reasonable, fact-based analysis, or if you're going as an advocate or as an activist and you're, causing a big scene. Either way, they're going to call you fear-mongering, intolerant. So it's a little rich for the Prime Minister to sit there and say, yeah, let's have a reasonable discussion about the immigration levels, when they wouldn't allow that. They haven't allowed that. They've jacked the number of immigrants coming to Canada. They haven't had an open debate when it came to a lot of their really reckless changes that they made to citizenship, letting people get their citizenship earlier and faster without a lot of requirements, cutting out a lot of the integration stuff, the screening, the security stuff. When they did all that stuff, they didn't want to have a reasonable debate about it. Now, looking back, they're saying, yeah, we would have had a reasonable debate about that, but it's this stuff now that we can't have a reasonable debate about. It's just so hypocritical. Okay, let's keep them going here.
And the the misinformation that is being deliberately and knowingly.
The misinformation, okay, the fear-mongering, which, by the way, it's Trudeau that's fear-mongering. This is Trudeau fear-mongering against conservatives. He's saying that conservatives are evil, and he's saying that they're fear-mongering, but he's the one that's fear-mongering. And the deliberate misinformation, give me an example. Give me one example of how conservatives are misleading Canadians. Just give me one example. And to the media in the room, I wish I was in the room as a journalist. I wish I was there, and I wish the journalists in the room would have said, can you provide an example, Prime Minister? What are you talking about? How are they misleading Canadians? Provide an example. Instead of just making these blanket claims that you can't really tie to anything. And then again, if he says, well, they said that it would undermine sovereignty, then you could point back and say, well, here's Ralph Goodale, who is the Liberal Public Safety Minister, back when he was opposition, accusing the Conservatives of undermining Canadian sovereignty for signing an agreement with the United States. So how is that any different than this? Again, no one holds this guy accountable. He just says whatever he wants, and the media nod along, and then they write stories about him, as you'll see in Canadian press and the CBC, that the headline just echoes exactly what Trudeau's saying. And yeah, they might have a line or two down later in the story about how the Conservatives contend what he's saying, but overall it's the Trudeau show and the narrative, and the media just happily go along with that.
Put out by the Conservative Party right now is very dangerous to something that has been an extraordinary advantage and benefit for Canada for generations. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to demonstrate for Canadians is that...
Okay, I'm going to get back to that one. He says that what the Conservatives are doing right now is dangerous to this consensus in Canada that we have. I'm going to go back to that, but I just want you to watch the end here of what he says, because it's really weird. He makes all of these accusations against Conservatives, and he says that they're fear-mongering and that they're creating all these divisions and that they're lying without providing any examples. And then he kind of stops, and then he makes this point, which kind of contradicts everything else he said.
We need to do a better job of having rigorous, complicated discussions about how we're going to solve complex problems.
Yes, you do.
Instead of trying to wish them away with a clever slogan that points fingers and lays blame.
That's literally what he just did. So he's saying that we're not just going to be able to fix this problem with a simplistic thing that points fingers and lays blame somewhere else. It's literally what he just did. So what Liberals and Trudeau himself are known for is coming up with these kind of simplistic ideas. Instead of addressing the complex criticisms that are directed at them, they'll just come up with a simplistic phrase like, well, yeah, we should have more immigration, because diversity is our strength. And no, who cares about the reckless illegal immigration and the crisis that's following? Because if you disagree with our policy, you're a bigot and you're un-Canadian. And so then he's saying we need to do a better job of not just having these simplistic phrases. But that's not something the Conservatives do, that's something the Liberals do. So that's just sort of his own incoherence in speaking and conflating different ideas and going from criticizing the Conservatives to kind of oddly criticizing his own party and his own policies. But the one thing that I really want to pick up on here is that essentially what Trudeau is doing in that little soliloquy that he did in front of the media is say, look, all the polls show, polling over the last 6 months or so, have shown a drastic decrease in approval rating of our immigration system as a whole. The Canadians, so like I looked at all this data when I was writing True North, Losing True North, my book from 2016, and basically going back like several decades, Canadian public opinion, Canadians have had a higher approval rating of overall immigration than any other like country. So if you compare Canada to the UK, the US, or Australia, Canada's approval for immigration was always like 10 to 20 points higher. I'm going to find this data and put it out sometime over the next week and put it into a report because it's really interesting to look at. And so Canadians overall had this like positive consensus around immigration, and both the Conservatives and Liberal parties in Canada maintained a policy where we were going to have mass migration, that we were going to welcome somewhere around 1% of our population every year, and that was kind of taken for granted. And the point I'm making in Losing True North is that that requires such a delicate balance. The reason that Canadians are pro-immigration more so than Americans or Australians is because we recognize the economic value of it, but also because we have this very rigorous integration system that we require that people who move here become Canadian, that they adopt Canadian values, that they integrate into the community, that they learn English and French. Canada is a country that is obsessed with language, and learning one of the two languages is key towards successful immigration program overall. And so Canadians were approved of this so long as these kind of basic tenets were met. And my concern with Trudeau when he came in and he had all these sweeping changes that they brought to the citizenship law, he got rid of the citizenship guide section that warned newcomers not to bring their barbaric practices into Canada, and it was this whole controversial thing, but Trudeau didn't want the Welcome to Canada guide to mention that honor killings and female genital mutilation were banned in Canada. So he took that part out. He went and told the New York Times Magazine that Canada had no core identity and core culture. Then he jacked up immigration numbers. He basically brought out the welcome wagon with illegal border crossers. He didn't create any kind of triage system to separate illegal from legal, from real refugees to those who are simply economic migrants. He just created a mess in so many different fronts, and I really documented that in my book, and things have only gotten worse in the last 2 years. And so what you see over the last, it had already started in 2015 to be fair, but the numbers have just absolutely shifted. So Angus Reid polls that came out over the summer found that Canadians overwhelmingly do not support immigration. They were the lowest approval ratings since pollsters started tracking public opinion in Canada in the 70s. Only 6% of Canadians wanted more immigration. And a Pew Research poll that just came out this week echoes that again. That basically saying that Canadians no longer want more immigration, and increasingly Canadians are not happy even with the current levels. They want less immigration. They want more restrictions, and Canadians are just not happy with the immigration system as it is. And I think it's pretty obvious why. Look at Justin Trudeau, look at what he's doing, look at what he's saying, look at his approach, his attitude. Anyone who criticizes the UN compact is a liar. That's basically what he just said. If you're critical of his integration program, his Syrian refugee program, where he just created a complete artificial timeline and rushed 50,000 migrants into the country without proper screening, vetting, integration programs. I wrote a number of stories in the Toronto Sun just about all the various ways that that system was just completely broken from the inside, how they skipped screening, how they skipped integration programs that they normally do. It was just a total mess. And so you have all of these kind of failures that are happening. And then increasingly you see stories within Canada of migrants not integrating, migrants not being happy in Canada, crime, that the cultural crimes that come from some of the migrant communities, like spousal abuse, again, horrific stuff like female genital mutilation and honor killings. Canadians see all this stuff, and then we see our Prime Minister basically saying that the problem isn't with his policies, the problem isn't with what he's doing and what he's done, what he's saying, but the problem is with the Conservatives, because they're pointing it out, they're criticizing us, and that's making Canadians not like our program. That's fear-mongering. And that's fear-mongering. And it's just so hypocritical. It's like, Trudeau can't recognize what he's doing. And, in a functioning society, it would probably be the role of the media to kind of push back against that and say, well, Prime Minister, it's your policies. It's, you're the one that's taking the country in this direction. Instead of blaming the opposition for criticizing you, why don't you blame yourself? Why don't you look at your own policies? Why don't you recognize the fact that it's your own policies that are unpopular and driving this collapse in public opinion? But of course they don't, because, well, there's a lot of reasons why, but they don't. The media don't. They just sort of, again, dutifully publish Trudeau's talking points, and that's the news. And so that's, of course, disappointing. On a related note, you have the immigration minister, Ahmed Hussein, tweeting And he's kind of going on the same line that the Prime Minister was going on. So here's his tweet from yesterday. It says, what does it say? Conservatives will continue to spread misinformation because it's always easier to pick on groups that are vulnerable, refugees and newcomers. So Hassan's kind of, he's kind of saying that the reason that conservatives are pointing out the flaws in the liberal immigration system is because they're bigots. They'd just rather pick on vulnerable people. They're such bullies and they're such evil, bad people that when they're criticizing the Trudeau government's immigration policies, which are a horrible failure, the real reason that they're doing it is because they just want to pick on vulnerable groups. You know, conservatives they just sit at home thinking, you know, who are the most vulnerable people in our society? Let's pick on them. You know, that's sort of his mentality. That's the crazy thing. That's what liberals really think about conservatives, that we're just these like evil, ordinary people. But anyway, he says, this is a 1 of 5 attack. He says, Canadians have the right to ask questions and have discussions on the facts. Here are some facts. It's funny, Canadians have the right to ask questions and have discussions on the facts. Well, again, that's kind of the opposite of the mentality of this government, because every time we as conservatives or as journalists ask questions or try to have discussions, we get called intolerant bigots by these same liberals. So they want to have discussion on the facts, which they're their facts, the facts that they contend, and they don't want to be questioned about it. And if you do question them, then they'll call you un-Canadian and they'll call you racist. That's what they were calling Ford government, or now that they're calling that to Andrew Scheer and the federal conservatives. So Andrew Scheer had said, fact, 40,000 border crossers since your tweet. Fact, 1.6 billion in cost to taxpayers. Fact, average wait time for asylum claims. A third up to 20 months. Do you dispute any of this? It's actually worse than that. The 1.6 billion doesn't include all the costs. The PBO came up with a report earlier this year that had 1.1 billion just in federal costs, and that's not including the provincial costs. So we know the provinces bear the brunt of the costs to migrants because they pay for all the social services. All of the social services, a report came up predicting that, or estimating that it's about $50,000 per migrant, and that falls on the provinces. So it's actually even more than that. But other than that, everything that Andrew Scheer is saying is true. It's a fact, it's verifiable. And so Hassan is sort of saying that those are not facts. And then he says, fact for context, there were 38,000 asylum seekers that came in 2008 under Harper government. Let me just make one small point on this fact. And then he says that asylum claims fluctuate and are driven by global migration. Of course, that's true. The interesting thing is that the Harper conservative government had a program that they implemented to fix the asylum claim system. So they created a triage system whereby when a newcomer would land in Canada, depending on what country they were coming from and what like a global rating of like safety, based not on like Canadian government, but based on a third party analysis, the person claiming asylum would get treatment based on the country that they were coming from. So right now, you know, we have all these people coming over from the United States. We have people coming from other safe countries like Haiti that we lifted, that we once had a safety program for them, and then we lifted it in 2015. So countries that Canada deemed safe would have a different program that they would follow compared to people that came from like legitimate refugee-producing countries like Afghanistan or China or other places like that. So the conservatives implemented this new program. It was pretty complicated and it was really interesting, and it led to a huge drop in migrants claiming asylum. Like as soon as this new system came in, basically migrants knew, okay, the jig is up, you can't take advantage of Canada in the same way that you used to, and you saw the numbers plummet. And then when Justin Trudeau was elected, came to office, he got rid of that program, and then we've seen this spike again. So it's interesting, you know, Hassan points to 2008, which was at the very beginning of Harper's time in government. If he had pointed to one of the later years, to after 2012, 2013, 2014, he would have seen that the number of asylum seekers was much, much lower because of this triage program that the liberals scrapped. And I wrote about this in my book as well. So again, super dishonest for the immigration minister to say that, especially when he claims like this, it's a fact. It's a dishonest manipulation of facts. Okay, next, Hassan says, asylum seekers and those who are waiting to be settled are different immigration streams. Yeah, obviously no one's contesting that. The Harper government failed to invest in faster processing for asylum claims. We've invested in border services. So, I love this word invest that liberals use. It's like, instead of just saying spending lots of money and throwing money at a problem, they call it investing. Well, the conservatives fixed the program so it was a lot better and had a lot more integrity. And then the liberals changed that. And then they saw a huge influx of migrants and they didn't have the capacity to deal with them. They didn't have enough immigration judges. And that's why there's been this huge backlog where migrants have claimed asylum and then they have to wait 2 years to see a judge. There aren't enough judges. That's not a Harper government problem. That's a liberal government problem because they got rid of the old system, allowed the flood, and now they're sitting there saying, well, you didn't invest in faster processing. Well, they didn't need it. Again, just totally dishonest. And this is for someone who's claiming to have facts on their side. Okay, finally, he says, happy to debate based on facts, but let's call it baloney when we see it. Okay, so that's all baloney. I'll just call it all out. You saw a lot of conservatives jump in and criticize the cabinet minister, the liberal immigration minister for this. Erin O'Toole said that this is a very misleading thread. We support the asylum process. When you quote numbers from 2018, he's basically just saying that there's a difference between people who cross illegally and then other people who do asylums. This is from their own budget. Apparently in 2017, the Liberals did not provide any new funding to the IRB, and that's why wait times in the backlog are anywhere from 53 to 133 months by 2021. So again, just pointing out the ways in which the minister is not telling the truth. And this is my favorite tweet by Michelle Rempel, who's the immigration critic for the Conservatives. And she's basically challenging him to a public debate. So that would be great. I would pay money to watch that happen. If they ever did, there should just be like a one-on-one debate, Rempel versus Hudson on immigration. Could do it for a charity or something like that. I think that would be really, really good to see. Maybe they can do a monk debate together or something like that. But Michelle Rempel is basically challenging him to a debate, pointing out every time you appear to debate, you're condescending and smug, and you're defending the indefendable. Bring it on. So good for Michelle Rempel, good for the Conservatives for pointing out the liberal nonsense. Because, this is the good thing about Twitter for now. There's a lot of bad things about Twitter, but the good thing about Twitter for now is that you can get through all the spin. You don't have to have things filtered through the evening news or through a biased CBC journalist or biased CP journalist who is getting paid by the Trudeau government to write that report. You can just see the facts straight out as they are. So when the Liberals do this kind of game of spinning and torquing and lying about the truth, you have Conservatives calling them right out, right there on the platform, providing a different perspective, providing facts that disprove their theory. And so, in theory, that would be the role of the press. In Canada, unfortunately, the press is not free. The press is paid for by the federal government, by the Trudeau government. And because of that, it's just obviously a conflict of interest, and we don't get the full facts. So there it is. I'll leave it at that for today. I think that, those year-end interviews are supposed to be two things, both kind of like a lighthearted look at the Prime Minister. And within that lighthearted look, we just see that he's sort of this superficial, uninteresting, unintelligent man. And then on the other hand, there's a sort of like top issues of the year, the top stories. Let's get in depth and get a real look at the Prime Minister. And from that, we get rambling incoherence and just blatant pre-election spin and lies. And unfortunately, the media are either too stupid or too in the bag for Trudeau to call him out on this. There are obvious exceptions, and I pointed out that I thought Evan Solomon did a good job interviewing him there and pushing him, which, when the Prime Minister's pushed, you just get rambling, incoherent sentences that don't really relate to the question that you've asked, but at least they try. And I think that the more that we see of this Prime Minister, the more we feel embarrassed by him. Hopefully the more Canadians see the real person that's leading the government. And, it's such a shame. You can tell. The reason that they go to insults, the reasons that they accuse the Conservatives of fear-mongering and accuse them of being divisive is because they want to distract away from their own failed policy. And it is the Trudeau government, it is Justin Trudeau's failed immigration policy that is leading to the backlash, the anti-immigration backlash. It is not the Conservatives. It is not, it's not activists. It's not other journalists. It's not people like me. It's not people like Andrew Scheer. It is Trudeau and his own reckless policies that are driving the backlash. He's only got himself to blame. He's trying to deflect, to blame the media or to blame the Conservatives instead, but it's not their fault. It's his fault. And he's only got his very bad policies to blame. So again, I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for watching. If you're watching on Facebook, don't forget to like my page. Also check out the link that I gave to the True North Initiative. We got 2 clubs that you can help us produce a lot of content. Again, we've got exciting changes rolling out in 2019. I'm really excited for 2019. Hiring a couple of staff writers, so I've been getting a lot of applications, and we're really building a new next generation media company, and I'm really excited about that. So check out those clubs if you're watching on Periscope or Twitter. Don't forget to like the True North Initiative. Go to our website, check out our clubs, and retweet and follow. So thanks so much. Have a great evening.